Exodus is a journey story. It's the account of Moses' journey from a childhood in Egypt to an adulthood in exile, and finally to the leadership of a nation. It's also the narrative of his nation's journey from bondage to freedom. What I'm saying is, Exodus, more so than many books of the Bible, reads like a story, complete with a villain and a daring escape, and even an unlikely hero. And that means that this book doesn't divide up neatly into sections or have a well-defined scholastic or theological structure. What does it have? I'll tell you next. So if you really want to divide Exodus up into sections, scholars mostly agree on dividing it in two. Think of these two sections as before Sinai and after Sinai. In part 1 of Exodus, that's chapters 1 through 19, several things happen. We meet all the important characters in the story. We meet our hero, Moses. We meet his sidekick and brother Aaron and his sister Miriam. We meet Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and the story's villain. And then there's the giant cast of secondary characters, known collectively as the children of Israel. We see Moses' growth from tentative leader to daring hero, the man who is initially afraid to speak to Pharaoh on the children of Israel's behalf, but who becomes the man to lead them right out of Pharaoh's clutches. We see Moses' fidelity to God in Egypt and in the wilderness. In Egypt, Moses continues to trust God through Pharaoh's repeated rejections of Moses' request and through 10 horrific plagues. Later, in the wilderness, Moses' faith is tested further as the people who look to him as a leader begin to question what he's gotten them into. But every time the children of Israel doubt, every time they express dismay or fear, Moses turns straight back to God. Moses trusts God's promises to him and to the children of Israel. And in every instance, God comes through, providing food and water in the wilderness and guidance, direction, and protection both day and night. Finally, we watch as Moses prepares to meet God on Mount Sinai and to receive the commandments that will govern his people. In part 2 of Exodus, that's chapters 20 through 40, the focus shifts from a story about a dramatic escape to a story about the covenant between God and his people. This section is pretty heavy with detail, especially when it comes to God's instructions for his tabernacle and the people's execution of those instructions. But what's most important about this second half of Exodus can be summed up in these 2 points. First, this section outlines the children of Israel's obligations to God, in the form of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, and in the form of God's instructions for worship, including the building and decorating of the tabernacle. Check out Exodus 31 verses 7 through 11 for a quick recap of the tabernacle requirements. Second, this section articulates the specifics of God's part in the covenant. In return for the Israelites' obedience, God promises to enlarge their borders, to destroy their enemies, to make them a great nation, and lead them into a land flowing with milk and honey, and finally, to dwell with them forever.